Good afternoon, everyone. It sincerely is great to be here. I want to thank the organizers of this event for hosting and organizing such an important national dialogue on issues important to people with disabilities and the entire disability community, including me. I want to thank Frank Sesno for agreeing to moderate. I think he's doing a great job. I thank, yes. I want to thank Governor Romney for the opportunity to represent you during this discussion. I also want to thank Ted Kennedy Jr. for being here, for participating, and most of all, I want to thank his family for all that they have done. I'm personally grateful, and I know we all appreciate the leadership of the Kennedy family through the years. Ted Kennedy Jr.'s aunt, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, founded Special Olympics. She went on to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Ronald Reagan. Ted's father, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, was widely respected for his years of legislative work. And finally, I want to thank you, the audience, everyone that's here in Columbus, as well as others that are joining us across the nation, for taking your time on this important issue. Some of you in the audience know me, but others do not. And I'd just like to start by telling you a little bit about myself. On April 29th, 2007, my life was changed forever. It was the day that our son Cole was born. And today, like any 5-year-old, his heart is full of love. He's active. He recently started kindergarten. He loves learning. And that day in April was the greatest day of my life, one of the greatest days of my life. Anyway. It was certainly one that I had dreamed of for a long time. It was also the day that we found out that our son was born with Down syndrome. And it wasn't easy news to hear. It's not what we had hoped. It's not what we had expected. It certainly wasn't what we had dreamed. The doctors sat Brian and me down and told us that Cole's life would be filled with doctor's visits, medical checkups, endless challenges. And just like that, our lives changed forever in the best way imaginable. Cole has made me a better person. Cole's made me a better legislator. He's taught me to celebrate the abilities of every individual instead of focusing upon disabilities. He's taught me to put people above politics, no matter the issue. I've been warmly welcomed into the disability community, and I'm grateful for that. An ever-growing family, eager to open the doors of opportunities for those with special needs. In fact, it was just days after Cole was born that Eunice Kennedy Shriver called. She says, "Cathy, we need to sit down and we need to talk about all these issues. Let's get a cup of coffee." The lessons that I have learned from Cole and others are why I do co-chair the Congressional Down Syndrome Caucus, the Disability Caucus, the Neurosciences Caucus. They are the reason that I have interns and fellows with disabilities working in my office. I am proud of the great strides our country has made for those with disabilities. Through strong bipartisan leadership and hard work, we have a good story to tell that is centered on disability policy and legislation. Milestone achievements include the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA, both that were signed into law by President George Herbert Walker Bush. IDEA promises every child a free and appropriate education regardless of their ability. ADA literally opened doors. And these acts promise opportunity and a brighter future for all. However, many in the disability community have not realized the full promise intended by these laws. For example, both the parent of a child with a newly diagnosed autism and the returning soldier who has lost a limb in honorable service are confronted with life-altering situations. While dealing with the diagnosis and all of those implications, The family with a child with autism is thrown into the muddy waters of early intervention, special education, Medicaid, and told to swim. The wounded soldier returns, not to the opportunities he expected, but to the grim reality of high unemployment and uncoordinated resources. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that 67% of working-age people with disabilities are unemployed. At the same time, 80% of them would like to work. And we've been experiencing high record unemployment in recent years, but it's been far worse for those with disabilities. 1 million people with disabilities have lost their jobs in recent years. We can and we must do better. To do that, we must first honestly examine the problem. It's not a lack of desire by America to help those with disabilities, or the failure of the intent of these important programs like ADA and IDEA. Instead, it's a problem with implementation. Rather than a clear, focused path for opportunities, we're presented with a bewildering array of agencies and programs that often work at cross purposes. The implementation of ADA and IDEA has occurred across the antiquated systems of Social Security, Medicaid, voc rehab, and others. These programs were designed long before the concepts of ADA and IDEA. It's like trying to go to the moon in a Model T. We need an improved engine to fulfill the promise of ADA and IDEA. We need to start looking at disability in a whole new way. The historic view of disability is that of dependence. This well-meant attitude of dependency results in paternalistic programs dictating care. It focuses on loss rather than investment, on can't rather than can. Disabled Americans are 57 million of us looking to participate in the American dream. This is not a single, homogeneous group. Disability includes the baby born with Down syndrome, the child diagnosed with autism, the returning war veteran with paralysis or traumatic brain injury, and the millions of baby boomers, of which half will develop a disability. In reality, we must remember that most of us have some kind of a disability, whether it's eyeglasses or a wheelchair. And one of the biggest problems is that we keep trying to draw an arbitrary line that separates us into two groups, one that can care for themselves and one that needs to be taken and cared for. There is no distinct line in the real world. To change outcomes, the next administration must fundamentally change the way it looks at disability. We need to see people with disabilities as an untapped pool of talent from which we can all benefit. This attitude is in sharp contrast to the idea that these are people that just need to be taken care of. Once we understand that key principle, we will further understand that we must move beyond simple curb cuts and wheelchair ramps to an investment in individuals with disabilities. Our system also needs the flexibility to meet the needs of the individual. And this is often difficult to do through a command and control approach from Washington, D.C. It just makes sense that a family in Walla Walla, Washington is going to make better decisions than someone in Washington, D.C. So, how do we get from where we are to where we need to be? The next step should be taken by whoever wins this election, and it should be a commitment to continued reforms and improvement in education and employment. We need better plans for transition to independence. There are programs that are showing promise in this area, and we need to study them and incorporate them into policy. One example is Project Search, which started right here in Ohio at Cincinnati's Children's Hospital. Ann Romney recently visited the program and was very impressed. To address the persistent problem of disability employment, barriers need to be identified and removed. Policymakers can learn about disability employment reform from studying the success stories that we find in states and private enterprise. For example, Walgreens has learned that people with disabilities are valuable employees. They have a disability employment inclusion policy, and they've created a whole new business plan using universal design that has allowed them to put that policy into action. Walgreens has a distribution center in Windsor, Connecticut, where half of the employees have a disability. And the company reports that this distribution center has the best productivity and fewest accidents of any of their distribution centers. And now they're expanding that commitment beyond distribution centers to frontline employees. Rather than fearing disabilities, Walgreens is embracing ability. Another company, Walmart, understands that people with disabilities are consumers. Some Walmart stores are now being built with special sections that include items that are on the must-have, the milk, the bread, the prescription drugs. And these special centers are built near the front of the store so that someone with disabilities doesn't have to navigate the entire store. Now, to Walmart's surprise, these must-have sections have become hugely popular by some that they weren't traditionally targeting. The mom with 2 small kids in tow, the 60-year-old with arthritis who's just beginning to experience the trouble of getting around. This is an example of a win-win. In addition to those efforts in business, some states have made policy changes that help those with disabilities. Here in Ohio, as well as Wisconsin, in my home state of Washington, there's employment first initiatives. These policies require that employment be the first consideration in service planning for working age adults with disabilities. When I look at Cole, I wonder, so what is he going to do when he grows up? I wonder, what will he study? Who will he become? Having a job is such an important part of who we are. A job is so much more than a paycheck. Think about it. When you meet a person for the first time, there are 2 questions that you ask. What is your name? And then, what do you do? We must keep the promise of ADA and IDEA alive. What is needed is leadership to build upon them. I endorse Governor Romney for president, and I'm serving as his liaison in the House of Representatives. I know him, and I also know that he lives these values. He cares deeply about people. Mitt Romney also has the business acumen to turn around the economy and get people to work. I know that Ann Romney will be a great First Lady. As someone with multiple sclerosis, Ann has firsthand experience with a disability, and she'll be a champion for the disability community within the Romney White House. I also know Paul Ryan. I've worked with him in Congress. He's another person who cares about people. Paul is very courageous. While many in Washington, D.C. will privately talk about how the $16 trillion debt is the greatest threat to our survival, the greatest threat to our national security, the greatest threat to our national dream, Paul is having an honest, open discussion about how to make programs sustainable for many generations to come. But no matter what happens in November, the bipartisan work and the leadership on both sides of the aisle for the disability community must continue. And when the next jobs plan is released, it must include people with disabilities. Thank you for having me here today.